I would like to give some constructive comments to Rob Hughes and Lee Mercado's studio report on the 28th of August about the many problems that Europe now faces with the immigrants and the refugees around Europe. Basically, it was a very good studio report, and I totally agree with Rob Hughes' closing statements about the purpose of transferring many parts of Europe into a multi-ethnical society, which our politicians have seek to do the last 30 years. At least up here in Scandinavia, it's very clear that it is a society where the upper class, a long way down the road, will go free of the problems and instead benefiting of a splitted and divided working class of people. I also find it important that they mentioned that it is actually a big amount of refugees that is coming from these wars down there that we have created at first hand, where we overturned some dictators that actually did maintain some very reasonable societies down there. The wars and the devastation that have followed is actually what is causing a big amount of the refugees. But I think the reportage also showed that it is easy for our journalists to fall into the trap that has been laid out for us by the ruling elite. Journalists have to be aware that if they say something that gives an impression that these refugees are not real refugees, but they only come here because they want to make more money and they only come here to take our jobs and so on, then they actually push on the elite's hope of creating ethnic conflicts here in Europe. These ethnic conflicts benefits their divide and conquer policy. For every asylum home attacked here in Europe, there is a whole bunch of elite people clapping their hands because they have succeeded in turning the normal people's rage and hate towards immigrant people. Instead of our own people should blame the real responsible people for the fact that there's no jobs anymore. The outsourcing of jobs is huge, and the whole welfare is falling down because you also take in cheap labor from Eastern European countries and so on. So all these real bad political initiatives, which the elite bear the responsibility of, is hidden because we have so much rage against immigrant people instead. Like I said before, we had a clear example on the previous Danish general election, where the whole political establishment actually succeeded in not discussing the real issues like our stupid monetary system that really cheated the poor part of the Danish population after 2008, the financial crisis. Things like that are really what they need to hide the political establishment. So when we deal with the subject of the many refugees around Europe now, we have to be careful and we have to take the discussion in constructive ways. And that means to be honest about the facts. There is simply no African people who wants to go through this nightmare of refugee stuff if they weren't forced to do it. It is horrific things these people have to deal with when they leave Africa to come up here and try to find a way to come in here. Nobody does that if they weren't forced to do it. And one more thing, they do not come up to Denmark or Sweden only because they intend to claim our social benefits. Nobody from Africa wants to leave everything they know and their families and their way of living, their culture, because they intend to come up here and settle with a monthly salary from the government. Actually, there is no money left every month if you live on Danish social help. That is a fact. The money is small from social benefits. Of the 10,000 crowns that were mentioned in the report from Rob Hughes, it actually there's only 6,500 Danish crowns left after tax. That's $900. And you also need to pay an apartment because you need a proper home if you are if you want to be entitled to these money at all. And you cannot get and just an example, you cannot get a normal home in Denmark for under 4,000 crowns every month. That's impossible. Then there's a few thousand crowns left you have to use for food and so on. I don't mind agreeing with the fact that it is a problem that we have to deal with these refugees problem in Europe. Yes, it is a problem. But there's no 25-year-old strong, working, capable African man who have any dream of coming up to Denmark only to sit still and receive money from government to survive. Of course, they all want to work if there were any work to be found here. In my opinion, these facts goes well in line with the fact that they have only come to these refugees camps around Europe because they actually are in deep need and hope of survival. The survival possibilities in their own countries must be simply too bad. Altogether, we actually have to find a solution now on this problem with these many refugees from Africa. I am 42 years old now, and already when I was in public school 30 years ago, we learned that the way we handled our farming policy here in Europe would definitely end up with an Africa with a lot of devastation and poorness, because in Africa they wouldn't be able to maintain any proper farming industry themselves. No export business could be going on, simply because the farming products from Europe were too cheap to compete with. So do not tell me that it is a surprise to the ruling elite that we now have so many refugees down there. That is something they have caused on purpose in this world. So do you see how this divide and conquer policy works? Tonight, the 3rd of September, we had a big Danish debate in the national TV about the refugee problem. And they succeeded with 2.5 hours of this debate between the highest politicians without one time acknowledging that fact I mentioned before. It cannot be a surprise to the ruling elite that there are so many refugees out there now. But my God, it was a surprise to our politicians. If we could acknowledge that fact and talk open about it, we might be able to put up some questions about fairness in the world. Do we here in Europe, especially northern part of Europe, do we really have to be so rich that we can take 2 holidays every year, that we can have high salaries on our work, that our old generation, the 68 generation, is getting big pensions in their old days, and old people still living in big houses. We all have good food every day, red wine, steaks, we eat a lot of meat. We basically just buy what we need. The whole way of living is just actually too rich. So let's talk about give up just a little bit of our welfare and getting these poor countries up on just reasonable living standards. And by the way, couldn't it be very nice if our farming industry here in Europe could be minimized, so we didn't see this crazy way of producing meat, which is hurting and is so bad to the animals. Instead, we could buy some more expensive meat from Africa or other parts of the world, and the same with the green things that we are producing with a lot of pesticides and so on that we are taking in. Let the things cost a little bit more and let it be a fair competition on the world market. That would be the way to